Hello and welcome back to another episode of Hear the Cannons. I am your host, Colin Hallboom, writer for BucsGameday, which is Sports Illustrated's only website dedicated specifically to covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm joined by River Wells, fellow writer for BucsGameday and editor for that matter. River, nice to have you with me. Before we get going here, I just want to implore our audience, whether loyal or new, we haven't been around that long, so I don't know how many loyal listeners we got quite yet, but that's the goal, to please like, subscribe to our channel on YouTube. We greatly appreciate it as we look to continue to add new guests and step things up here at Hear the Cannons. So please make sure you do that. Rate and review on wherever you get your podcast if you're listening on the audio version. We got a number of things to talk about this week. We have the good news of Antoine Winfield Jr.'s contract, which we talked about last week. He spoke to the media.
Absolutely.
But we've also got Tristan Wirfs not showing up at OTAs, among some others. Is this going to be a holdout? A report by Jeremy Fowler. We're going to talk about that. River was live at OTAs yesterday, so he got a firsthand glimpse of what we got going on there. So we're going to pick his brain on that. We have specific dates announced for preseason, some interesting PFF content I want to dig into, and a few other things. So that's what's on the docket.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So I want to start, River. I want to start with the Tristan Wirfs holdout because that's pretty big news. Didn't report to OTAs, and according to Jeremy Fowler of ESPN, doesn't intend to in the immediate future, per source. The multi-year All-Pro, as we all know, is seeking a long-term contract, and we know the Bucs want him on one, but he doesn't want to risk injury in the meantime. And so the unfortunate part about this report from Jeremy Fowler is that it's saying sides have not made progress on a new deal. Is this, River, in your mind, a big concern? Is it? I mean, we all know this happens all the time in the NFL every season. What are your thoughts, your initial thoughts when you saw that Tristan Wirfs was holding out? Were you surprised? And what do you think is going to happen next?
To be honest with you, I don't think it's that much of a concern. When I got to OTAs and I saw Tristan wasn't there, I assumed it was a veteran thing more so than it was a holdout thing. But it makes sense, I think, on both sides. Tristan wants to protect his body and wants that long-term deal, and I think he'll get it from the Bucs for sure. At the same time, Jason Light and Tampa Bay just got done with the Antoine Winfield Jr. deal. They've done a lot of really good work to get guys back, get them on long-term deals, and I think Tristan's next, and that'll come soon for sure. I don't know when they'll start talking about that formally, but I don't know. Do you think he's going to hold out further than this? Because I would be surprised. He's in the building. He's working out. I wouldn't expect him to skip out on a mandatory minicamp or training camp for that matter, but we'll just have to see.
I agree. It doesn't seem like a Tristan Wirfs DNA type of move. Not to say like he's a bad guy if he chooses to take that route, but like,
right. I would agree. Yeah.
And he's surely gotten all indications because I mean, Jason Light and his staff have done so publicly. Like everyone knows they want Tristan Wirfs and they'll sign him. They'll probably reset the tackle market. Right. So, I think it's going to get done. I think this is more of a formality, a little bit of a leverage play, an opportunity for him to say, I don't want to risk injury right now. Why do I need to put in that extra time this early in the offseason? And I'm pretty confident that Tristan Wirfs is happy in Tampa Bay. Already got a ring on his big finger, and
real quick too, got his first year, him in Winfield. Yeah.
What a class.
What a class. I'm always for the players getting their bag. Always will be. And, if anyone deserves it, it's certainly Tristan Wirfs. But Jason Light got some other deals done earlier, did a lot, some good job of that. And then now Tristan's up next. But whenever that happens, it happens. And I don't think it's going to be super soon, but it'll get done because, like you said, I think both sides are in some mutual agreement on that one about Tristan being in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, so I'm curious what like Bucs Nation is feeling right now on this. I think we'll get a clearer picture as this thing moves along. Speaking of OTAs, I mean, pretty encouraging, I think, for the Bucs. Not surprising, but the fact that Antoine Winfield Jr., fresh off signing this new huge contract, is at OTAs, and I think he's doing all the right things right now. Not just doing them, but he's saying them as well. I know you attended his presser live. I want to just quote part of it that I think is most encouraging for Bucs fans. And that was him saying, my goal every season is to be better than the previous year. And then he talked about how safeties coach Nick Raponi always says, to who much is given, much is expected. And he said, I know that coming in, I'm going to be better than I was before. Right. And coming off the season he just had, that's hard to believe, but it's great to see that his mind is in that place. He said, I'm going to train harder than I was before. Something that is also big for me is just learning something new every single day, because there is so much to learn in this sport and so many ways that I can improve my game. I'm just excited to be given the opportunity here in Tampa. I've still got that fire in me, and I don't see it going away at any time. You'll love to see it. You'll love to hear it.
Absolutely.
He's doing everything right early. I get it. But, if there's anyone who could, I guess what I want to get at is, like, could we see an even better version of Antoine Winfield Jr.? Could he still be ascending after putting together what I think was undoubtedly the best season for a safety this past football season?
It was an unbelievable season for a safety. We're talking not just pass offenses, forced fumbles, interceptions. He had 5 or 6 sacks, right? It might have been 5 or 6, but crazy season all around it. Every facet of defense. That would be impressive. If he can play to that level or near it even for the next few years, I think it's a home run signing. And again, when you have a contract like that, a lot of players do that. What happens after that contract year is always really telling and important too. And whether some players still have the drive to get going. And everything I know about Antoine Winfield Jr. leads me to believe that he will still have that drive, just like you said, that fire going forward. And if he could play at that level or somehow even better, that would be a steal for Tampa Bay, honestly, because he single-handedly affected multiple games last year on his own, which we talked about ad nauseum. But great player, and like you said, going to OTAs, showing up, getting the work in. That's one thing that makes it seem like he's telling the truth there when he's talking about keep grinding the fire in him. So you do love to see that sort of thing, and I'm hopeful that he can continue that great sort of play that he's been displaying, not just in 2023, but before that too. So yeah,
and I don't think necessarily him like replicating that kind of statistical production. I mean, that's a lot of splash plays he came up with, but what will define whether he earns this money and continues to ascend will be the consistency. Is he able to consistently perform like he has so far in his career, right? And a guy who plays the way that he does, injuries have caught him at times, nothing too severe, but staying in the lineup, playing consistently, and being a leader on the back end of that defense. He said it, too much is given, much is expected. It's really going to be expected now, and he's going to have to show that on a consistent basis. Also, it's worth mentioning in regards to, like, everyone's talking about the holdout primarily because of the report by Fowler, but like Mike Evans, Vita Vea, Will Golston, Randy Gregory were all absent as well on Tuesday.
And those are all vets, so it's not something I'm super worried about. I guess if you want to nitpick, you could look at Gregory, but Gregory's a guy who's played in the NFL for a long time, and he probably is fine going to mandatory minicamp and training camp, getting his work in there. So it's not something I'm worried about. We'll see how it goes further on, I guess. But I don't necessarily think Tristan Wirfs needs OTAs like, some players and rookies might need OTAs. So.
Yeah, especially for those big guys, right? They're not wearing pads. It's kind of like, it's got to be frustrating not getting to hit people properly.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you were at OTAs. River, you wrote a piece about some of your observations. Why don't you take us through what some of your biggest observations were, and then I may chime in with my own thoughts along the way.
Absolutely. The big one, or I guess one of the more notable ones, was you take a look at the first team line, which first team line had Robert Hainsey on it because veterans kind of in OTAs get that sort of grace. Barton will start at center this year, but Sua Opeta was playing left guard there, and he came from Philadelphia as a free agent. Vet minimum type of guy, didn't get a lot of play time in Philadelphia necessarily, but we've heard Liam Cohen talk about him. We've heard Todd Bowles talk about him. It seems like in the building they're pretty big fans of him. And Ben Bredesen from New York was on the second line, another free agency pickup that the Bucs had. So looks like, how indicative that could be given OTAs is up in the air, I suppose, but he's already in the first team line. The team's spoken about him multiple times. It looks like he could be a front runner in that building to take that left guard job, which if they're already that confident in a guy like Sua Opeta, that would be pretty encouraging, I would think. But we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I think those comments you alluded to I think you said, hey, Liam Cohen had some comments about how this guy's going to be a starter in the league. Like, you have to consider where he's coming from. Right now, he still did have, I believe it was 10 starts, 6 last season for the Eagles.
Yeah.
That he was playing behind arguably the best offensive line in football, and they have been for a while.
Yep.
So he just couldn't get on the field. That doesn't necessarily, it's not an indictment on his abilities. He's a big, strong boy.
And Bucs fans might remember Shaq Barrett was in a similar situation in Denver before he came to Tampa Bay. So if it works out like that,
yeah,
please, yeah. We'll see though. We'll see.
Yeah, for sure. But I yeah, and you know what? Let's not undersell it. Like I talked on a previous episode. I've written about it. I mean, your offensive line is as good as your weakest link. A lot of people believe that. I don't know if I think you can still mask issues along the offensive line, as we've seen, especially dealing with injuries for various teams. But it would be a huge boon for this team if Sua Opeta could prove to be an average left guard, because the way the rest the way the rest of their line is shaping up, and the job that Jason Light has done to overcome, like, those unexpected retirements, maybe not so much in the case of Ryan Jensen, but like it's still been a recovery process from losing an Ali Marpet and a Ryan Jensen, trading a Shaq Mason, shuffling Luke Gedeke around. I mean, there's been a lot of moving parts there, and if this team could find some stability at the most underappreciated yet important position in all of professional sports, the offensive line, I think it would be massive for the offense. What was some other observations you had, River?
Well, we have the new kickoff rule going on, so that's more XFL style. Got 2 receivers out there, and then the lines are close to each other. Which, by the way, I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but I'm really excited for the new kickoff rule. I think it's a good idea. Obviously, you had Devin Tompkins last year be the return man, and then Trey Palmer was working behind him in 2023. But Jaylen McMillan was out there working on some special teams sort of kick rolls. So might see him in the mix there. Don't know. Might see Palmer. But they're trying both out for that second spot, because now there's 2. Some players, skill position players, might have some added value there in special teams. So that could be a lot of fun, I think, for sure.
I was wondering about Bucky Irving as a guy who has a little bit of kick return experience, and with this new rule, which, like you, I'm also looking forward to. Like, it can't hurt, especially how the kick returns have. I mean, it's a good thing for Tampa, especially for Tampa, though, right? Who's been so atrocious in the special teams, particularly the return game. So I see it more as like it's like a play. Like, you could use a stout player in this scenario more so than like that long speed type of guy. So Bucky Irving was interesting to me based on his elusiveness. So I wonder if he'll end up getting a look there. But that's cool. That's a good update. Did you have any others?
Trying to think here. Some guys look pretty noticeably bigger. Me and JC were talking about that at training camp. Guys like Cody Mock, Robert Hainsey. Definitely look at it. They've bulked up a little bit heading into this next season, so that could be interesting to see. That ends up benefiting some guys like that. I would assume Hainsey's going to be a backup. I guess technically he'll be competing for the left guard position, but Mock. I thought I'd like to get your take on this too. I wasn't a huge fan of Cody Mock's rookie year. Now, granted, offensive line is one of the hardest positions in the NFL to adjust to. And we saw it happen with Luke Gedeke his rookie year, and he ended up being a pretty damn good tackle on the right side. So Mock needs some work. If he can get there, and then if Barton can get there, and you get a good option at left guard, that line, even average, honestly, I think that line's going to be a lot better this year, and that'll help the run game going forward.
Yeah, I think I wasn't as down on Cody Mock. I know there was some inconsistency, which to me is the biggest thing, but I guess I just expect that from a rookie.
Of course. And I thought, sorry to interrupt you there. I thought he had a pretty good stretch, or he had a pretty rough stretch to start. From the San Francisco game onward, he picked up a little bit, and you could see some noticeable improvements. And then I felt like he kind of lagged again towards the end of the season last year. So trying to dig into that stretch of play there for the second year is going to be really important. And if he can, again, huge boon for Tampa Bay with that line.
Yeah, and he's a great athlete out in space, so he can be a real asset pulling and playing in the run game. I'm happy to hear that he looks a little bit bigger because I think he needs to add
Mhm.
some additional strength. So that would certainly go a long way towards hopefully him, producing a little more consistently and not having those lapses over several weeks. And always tough to evaluate so early for an offensive lineman, especially he was a tackle in college, so.
Oh yeah, the rookie year is tough, man.
Yeah.
That's a tough curve. So is tight end. Tight end's a very tough curve from your rookie year to going onward. So those type of positions, you kind of got to wait and see. But we will wait and see with Mock, and hopefully he can improve going forward.
Okay, so you've had a couple glimpses now, rookie minicamp, Jaylen McMillan.
Yeah.
So I've talked to a couple people, and I've certainly read a lot of opinions from people a lot smarter than me when it comes to evaluating draft prospects. People who have watched Jaylen McMillan a lot more than I have, and all of those people feel very strongly that he is like strictly a slot receiver. And this is so interesting to me because of the conversation surrounding Chris Godwin moving back to the slot. Chris Godwin's excited about it. Todd Bowles is excited about it. I mean, on the surface, that in of itself, I would agree is Chris Godwin has proven to be where he's most effective in the slot. But if Jaylen McMillan is strictly a slot and Chris Godwin's occupying the slot, what's got to give here? Does this mean Trey Palmer is just going to get the majority of the reps, out on the outside opposite Mike Evans, or are they going to actually try Jaylen McMillan there? And if they do, is that going to be a major miscast of this guy's strengths and potentially hamper his development if the long-term goal or where he's going to be best is the slot? So I don't like the lack of clarity. Like I want guys to be utilized where they're at their best. And for Jaylen McMillan, I can't imagine that sitting on the bench behind Chris Godwin because Godwin's going to be. I think he's going to have a bounce back year now, a couple years removed from that devastating knee injury. Like I think we're going to see the Chris Godwin, especially in a contract year that Bucs fans have fallen in love with over the years. As we get a question on YouTube from DE13 talking about the offensive line, I think Jam looks. And then he's chiming in here on the Jaylen McMillan piece, which is appreciated, saying that he looks way more versatile than to only slot him. And again, like I agree on paper, smooth route runner, like he's got some length, right? He's creative, he's a good route runner, like I just said. But again, a lot of experts are saying he's got to be in the slot. So, what are your thoughts on this, River? You got a plan here? What do you think's going on behind closed doors, man?
It's tough to say. It's interesting to try and theorize where their head's at with Jaylen McMillan because, as you mentioned, the big thing is that Chris Godwin's in a contract year. They're going to put him in the slot because he's been most productive in his career in that area. Talked to Chris Godwin at OTAs actually, and he mentioned how it makes him feel like a more versatile receiver when he's in the slot. Be it blocking, route running, stuff like that. I think a lot of McMillan's value, and I do think he's versatile. He's mentioned it. Guys like Liam Cohen have mentioned it. So that's been up. That's been brought up. But McMillan's going to be there next year. Chris Godwin might not be. And I'd like to hear your opinion on this too. And I'm sure we'll talk about this a lot more during and then after the season. But if I were a betting man right now, I'm not sure Chris Godwin's back here next year. And if that's the case, McMillan slots right in, and he fits really nicely as a slot receiver. And then you got Trey Palmer, who's a guy for the outside. He's not really a slot guy. He's a speedster that goes, he's a burner on the outside. So I think you can kind of this year play around with McMillan, see where he thrives, see if he is truly versatile, like a lot of people are claiming. And if he's not, the worst case scenario is if he really thrives in the slot, then you got a guy next year for the slot when Chris Godwin might not be here anymore. So it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah. I do believe that Chris Godwin's performance this season will have an impact, obviously, on whether he is ultimately retained. But right. I am with you in the sense that how long can you justify paying two $20+ million receivers who are on the wrong side of, their careers. And not in terms of performance, just how long they've been in the league, right? You need youth
Right.
at that position. And obviously they've committed to Mike Evans after the dynamic season he put together last year. But I know Chris Godwin is beloved not just by the fans, but in the organization for his work ethic. He fits that criteria of qualities and attributes that Jason Light looks for when he drafts people. Jason Light drafted him, one of his best picks, really. And as I was saying earlier, I think Chris Godwin, especially moving back to the slot, is going to have a big season. Like, how much does sentimentality play into it? I mean, Jason Light he's a smart guy. Like, he's going to do what's best for his football team. But I am kind of with you still. Like, it's just hard to justify that kind of investment in aging receivers, unless Godwin really wants to stick around and he's willing to take a below market deal. That'd be the best case scenario for Bucs fans, because then I could see it happening. But if he's looking to cash in on another big contract longer term, there'll be, especially if he has a big year, there will be other organizations that are going to throw him that bag. So
absolutely.
We'll see. We'll worry about it when we get there, I guess. And I think I speak for Bucs fans when I say that.
Right. There's still this year, of course. And last year, you could argue he was misused a little bit last year. Still coming back from the injury on top of that. So, those two things factored into it. And we'll see this year if he can shake off both those things, be back in the slot, and then get his looks. And that might help his case for sure.
And he's such a tenacious player. He's so good at going over the middle. He loves to get in on the action. He's an excellent blocker. Those are things Liam Cohen, why he wants him closer to the middle of the football field, right? So I'm sure he's chomping at the bit to utilize Chris Godwin in more creative ways, and we'll see how that shakes out as the offseason moves along. And speaking of the offseason, as we gear up towards the season, preseason games / dates were announced. And for anyone who doesn't know, Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to play 2 road games, and then the third week of the preseason, they'll be back at home. First game is at Cincinnati. Second game will be at Jacksonville, keeping it in state. And then Friday, August 23rd will be their final preseason game, where you'll probably get the best look at, guys who will be on the field during the regular season. And that's versus, as I said, Miami. That'll be their last game. So any thoughts on that schedule? I mean, it's nothing too surprising there.
No, and I would point out again, I think I've talked about this a little bit before, but it's fun to see the training camp joint practices, because those can often be way more intense than preseason games are, because you guys starters playing against each other, and the competition's also in camp as well as in the preseason. So excited to have the Bucs go against the Dolphins and the Jaguars too. The Dolphins, very good team last year. Jaguars remain somewhat of an enigma from year to year, but have played some really good football very recently as well. So 2 great quarterbacks like Trevor Lawrence and Tua Tagovailoa going up against them, going up against some strong receivers and Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle. So really excited to see how that goes. And it'll be a good test, I think, for a lot of rookies, for a lot of newer players, and to really get a feel for the system and some good competition.
For sure. 100%. Now, I alluded to Pro Football Focus off the top. Pro Football Focus is obviously a major talking point because they pump out a ton of content based on data and the analytics that they collect. And the Buccaneers, so what they recently did is they named the most underrated player on each NFL team. And calling someone underrated is obviously a bit of a subjective measure, especially for an outlet like PFF. But I found it really interesting, and I actually think they nailed it. I'm really curious to hear any of our live listeners if they want to chime in on who they think the most underrated Buccaneer is.
Yeah.
But I think PFF got it right, and they named Luke Gedeke there as the Bucs' most underrated player, and I like it. And I wrote about this for BucsGameday, and I talked about guys like Mike Evans, Levante David, Chris Godwin at points, Vita Vea, even these are guys we always, as Tampa Bay Buccaneers people who cover the team or watch the team. I think there's a collective chip on everyone's shoulder for so many of their players and the team as a whole being underrated. And each of those players have been underrated, but they've kind of been talked about so much as underrated that therefore they kind of get some of that notoriety or acknowledgement, especially after winning the Super Bowl playing with Tom Brady. Not the case for Luke Gedeke, especially. He's only got 1 year under his belt at right tackle, and he graded out extremely well in both the run and the pass, which is so important. So, I mean, I was curious, did you agree? Do you agree with that based on your eye test and all the action that you've watched up close and personal? And how do you feel? Is there another player who's deserving of consideration for being the most underrated player on the Buccaneers?
I think Gedeke's got to be up there solely. Now, granted, it was one season, and if he can keep that going, the Bucs are set at right tackle, which is really good because when that move happened, when they moved Wirfs from right to left tackle and they plugged Gedeke in there, I was a huge detractor of that move. I thought it was kind of ridiculous, and I thought that I didn't want to mess up Tristan Wirfs, and Gedeke was very poor his first year in the league at guard, and look what ended up happening. Gedeke played very good football, really solid, and Wirfs ended up playing really good football at left tackle as well. Still a really solid pass protector, still really good. So great move there, and I think for that reason it has to be Gedeke because as bad as the line play kind of overall was last year, it could have been so much worse if he didn't step up and play some good football, and he 100% did. So I do love the pick as well.
Gotta love the honesty, man. Hindsight honesty. You don't see it every day. That's how you know River Wells is a good dude. Not afraid to call himself out, man. I love that.
Wasn't a fan of it, and then here we are. Luke Gedeke's playing good football, and if he keeps playing good football, and Graham Barton is the player that the Bucs think Graham Barton is, and Mock develops, and it's a lot of ifs, but this line could go from having some serious problems to really shaping out pretty nicely. So I'm curious to see how it goes.
A lot of ifs, but nowhere near as many ifs as last year.
Right.
So we'll take that progress. And you're right, man. I think this year will really kind of determine if that was the right decision. So even though early reviews on kicking Gedeke out to the right side and moving Tristan Wirfs to the left are very positive, you need to see, you want to see Tristan Wirfs really establish himself as an elite left tackle because he was, in my opinion, right there with Lane Johnson, if not better, based on the age thing at right tackle, right? And if you're the greatest in the world at your position, it's hard to see that guy get moved, right, to an unfamiliar area. So year two, if Wirfs really gets used to that spot and gets even better, that's huge. And then the same, of course, for Gedeke, right? He could theoretically take a step back. But, when I that loss to Detroit Lions in Detroit in the divisional round, I talked to Luke after the game, he gave me a one-on-one interview, and I was really impressed. That was my first time interviewing him, and just he got his face lit up when I asked him what he was going to do this offseason, and he said he's staying in Tampa and he's working out with Tristan Wirfs every day.
Grinding, yeah,
grinding with Tristan Wirfs. So I mean, there's not much of it, the commitment's there, and it's great to see that those two players are so close. They love hitting the gym, and that's obviously an important part of if you're an offensive tackle in the NFL. So,
right.
Now, so it seems like we agree with PFF's decision for most underrated player. Not sure we would agree with how they ranked the best receivers in the NFL.
Yeah, let's talk about this. This is a fun one.
Right after I'm saying Mike Evans used to be underrated, but he isn't anymore. Well, guess that's not true, is it? Yeah, this is wild, man. So Mike Evans, they ranked the best receivers in the NFL. Mike Evans was ranked 20th. So, before I jumped to any conclusions, I kind of wanted to see who was there. And I was with you, man, River, because you hit us up in the chat and you were like, what? That's crazy. And you were angry. You don't get angry. You're a mild-mannered dude, but you didn't like that.
Crazy.
Yeah. Well, okay, I'm sorry. The one that just really grinds my gears is Nico Collins is 15th. And Mike Evans is 20th.
That's pretty brutal.
Nico Collins, you got to show us more than that. I mean, awesome season. Looks good.
Can I talk about a little bit of an underrated one, perhaps? Maybe it depends on how you see this. Cooper Kupp at 9
Too high.
His last 2 years is pretty interesting. Injury ridden, but the way I see it, if you're not on the field and you're not playing, then your value's not there. And it might be unfortunate. It might be wholly an accident. It might be beyond your control. But Mike Evans is playing. He's racking up 1,000-yard seasons, either through good fortune or through his own sturdiness. He's not leaving the field very often. So it's very cheesy, the best availability. But Cup at 9 after the 2 years he's had is pretty interesting to me because I don't think he's nearly shown off that production that would deserve a top 10 bid.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it outrageous, but interesting is a good word for it. Like, I disagree with that. That seems too high. Like, like you said, he's missed a ton of games over the past 2 years, right? Like,
right.
A 6th-round rookie was the best receiver on their team. Not to take anything away from Puka Nacua, but that just shows you how much of an issue Cooper Kupp's injuries have been and how he hasn't been able to be relied upon, which is the polar opposite of Mike Evans, who is just the epitome of consistency. And the dude led the NFL in touchdowns, tied with Tyreek Hill. I mean, come on now. Like, I think a little more recency, I don't want to call it recency bias, just recency analysis would be useful for this exercise. Mr.
I agree.
Collinsworth. So, and then DeAndre Hopkins is a similar one to me. He was ranked ahead of Mike Evans 3 spots. Yeah. He's solid. Like, DeAndre Hopkins is solid still, but like, give me Mike Evans all day over DeAndre Hopkins right now.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point to contend. I wouldn't hate that argument for sure. And I would say, I mean, you got guys like, DJ Moore at 12. I'm a little iffy on too. I mean, he did have a good year last year, but I'm not ready to say he's 8 spots better than Mike Evans at wide receiver. So interesting to see. Some of these are interesting. I think Nico Collins at 15, like you mentioned, is pretty egregious. And honestly, if we're talking Amari Cooper and Terry McLaurin, the 2 people above Mike Evans on this list, I don't even know if I would put them ahead of him at this juncture. So interesting list for sure.
Yeah, you're being too diplomatic. I think it's BS is what it is. And I hope Jason Light's already posted it over Mike Evans' locker, man, because we all know.
Oh, I'm sure he has. Yeah,
we all know the big dog keeps receipts. So, yeah, man, that's just something Mike thrives on, though, right? Like, and he was rated ahead of Keenan Allen, Jalen Waddle, so there were some names still ahead of it. It was a very interesting list, and I know often. Pro Football Focus's lists are interesting because they go by the analytics, but Mike Evans graded out pretty highly by whatever measure you use. So an interesting discussion. Tampa Bay fans don't have to worry about losing that chip on their shoulder, right? Even
it's always there.
It's always there.
And Baker Mayfield was ranked 20, or he was ranked pretty low too, I think, on PFS quarterbacks list.
Yeah, and the Bucs offense as well. I wrote about that also. Bucs offense really well. So, like, that's just a collective chip that
we have a sorry.
No, please.
We have a comment here. What about Culp and Otten? How's it going to work? What are your thoughts about Devin Culp and his offense? I'm curious to get your feelings on that, because I mean, I've seen him at OTAs, of course, and rookie minicamp, but I want to know where you think he fits into this offense.
Yeah, I think he's got to make the team first. I think how does it work? Yeah. How does it work? We got to see if Devin Culp can make the team. And the way he's going to do that as a receiver, let's not kid ourselves. He's not going to be an inline tight end. Now, the speed is very intriguing, no question. But Cade Otton, so he's a guy who came to mind when we were just discussing the most underrated Buccaneers. He's not there yet but he really came on at the end of the season. If you look at his numbers through that playoff run and the last few games of the regular season, I was very encouraged by what I saw from
playoff run was particularly impressive. Yeah.
Big time, man. Sure. So if he can take another step, that's another really exciting weapon for Baker Mayfield. And he can help in the run game. Like, he's getting better as a run blocker. And I'm curious to see how Liam Cohen will utilize his tight ends. He prefers to have one on the field. So that also doesn't necessarily bode well for Devin Culp, but he could make the team, but we're not going to see a lot of him this year, man. Like, in my opinion, at all, even if he makes the team. That's my thoughts. What do you think?
I think Otten definitely needs to get better. I'm not a huge fan of, you had Keith and Otten last year, often 2 tight end sets, and I think that was a mistake from Canales. But Otten definitely has the tools, and you see him in clutch moments, like in Atlanta last year. And he, in that playoff run, like you mentioned, he definitely showed up. The Eagles game, he was all over the place. He's got to be able to consistently bring that production, I think, out more. And granted, he shouldn't be playing 98% of snaps like he was last year, which is kind of crazy. So maybe with a little bit lighter of a load, he'll be able to kind of get in his bag a little bit more. But looking to see some improvement still from Otten going forward. And yeah, I agree. Culp's got to make the team. And yeah, he's a lighter tight end. He'd be majorly a receiving guy. Kind of reminds you a little bit of like the Darren Waller sort of archetype. Curious to see what his plan would be, given that I don't think we're going to see as many 2 tight end sets as we did last year under Canales. We'll probably see 1 tight end set with Liam Cohen. So Otten will probably get favor on that. And again, whether or not Colt makes the team or not, if he does, he'll definitely be used as more of a receiving threat than any blocking or anything like that.
You're right. So you're right in terms of like seeing Keith and Otten on the field together was frustrating. I didn't like that because, Keith does one thing and that's block. Not a threat at all in the receiving game. So feels like a wasted spot for what has become this day and age more of a skill position. And that was tough to watch in terms of like Otten's usage. Yeah, you're right. It is hard to like, he could have been worn down for all we know. But they have no choice but to use him that much because the position is extremely thin. And I was I was banging the table for tight end in this draft leading up throughout this draft cycle more than I feel like most people were. I wanted them to make a move for that position. Now I love how the draft turned out. They had a bunch of needs, but I feel like people are kind of overlooking that. Now bringing in Liam Cohen, like we've already talked about now, he doesn't prioritize the tight end as much, so he's not going to have 2 on the field a whole bunch, so I get it. But I do think you need quality depth at the position because after K-Dot, it's a big concern. Payne Durham had a couple of catches, but they've
right.
It's like they're spooked by the OJ Howard. They're still having nightmares about the OJ Howard investment or something.
Yeah, I to be honest with you, and this is more draft discourse than it is overall Buccaneers discourse. I am not a fan of drafting a tight end in the first round. Like ever. That and running back. I don't like messing with that in the first round. And partially because tight end is such a hard position to develop skill-wise. And the difficulty curve is greater there than maybe any other position in the league. Quarterback's obviously up there, offensive line. But it's really hard to get a tight end and have them contribute day one, year one. And granted, Otten's going to be in year 3, so he's in a rookie. But that's why it's possible that something could click and he could end up doing exactly what he needed to do and kind of being able to take that play he had in the playoffs and consistently apply it across the regular season because it's such a hard position to learn and pick up at the highest level. So I definitely agree, though, that they could have drafted a tight end at any point going forward, around day 2, day 3. And they went on day 3 with their very last pick of the draft. But Culp's not an archetype of tight end that we see as often. He's more so strictly a receiving guy. Doesn't really block. Opposite of O'Keefe, kind of in many ways. So I'm curious to see where they end up using him and where they fit into his plan. Should he make the team?
For sure, and I'd like to go on the record. Like I would also not recommend ideally drafting a tight end or a running back, but there's always exceptions. So I spoke about Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers was one. It's an interesting thought. For sure. I would have drafted Brock Bowers if he was there at 26. Please, run it in. But Graham Barton, I'm very happy with too. Certainly fits more of a need. I'm just saying. Okay, now here's something that hasn't been talked about a ton. I'm curious as to how you feel about this. Do you think? I think likely the Buccaneers aren't going to make any splash moves in free agency, but I see guys like Stephon Gilmore. Mainly Stephon Gilmore is the guy I'm kind of zeroed in on here. The Bucs stayed pat at outside corner. Sure, they got Tyke Smith in there to compete for that starting nickel position, but Zion McCollum starting on the outside, talk about putting a lot of faith in a guy who hasn't shown it yet. That is the definition of that, and that's such an important position. Right, Jamel Dean's he's not super old either. If you could so Stephon Gilmore, Bucs have $8.5 million in cap space right now. I mean, that's not really relevant. They still have some guys they got to sign.
They do.
Like they got
3 more draft picks.
3 more, including
right?
Barton and Braswell.
Yeah.
But there's always ways to open up money, and I think if you could get him at a good number, I would likely be in favor of Stephon Gilmore. I know like Xavier Howard's available too, but Gilmore is the one who's interesting to me because of how I think he could impact the secondary for the Buccaneers in the locker room as well. He was making $10 million a year with the Colts, so like, you know, he's still available. You could, I would assume, get a discount from that. I'd be interested. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'll tell you 2 things. One, what I think is probably the thought in the building. I don't know, but just my estimation of things based on how it's gone. And 2, personal thoughts. My thought is that they're pretty satisfied with McCollum, Bryce Hall, and Jamel Dean. I don't think they're going to go out and get a guy like that, like Gilmore, because I think they like who they have. My personal thoughts, there were a lot of people saying last year that they saw progress from Zion McCollum, and they kind of like what they saw in a vacuum. And that was one thing I just never really got as someone watching the team. I don't think McCollum's really shown much at all. I think he still struggled last year in the games that he did have to play. Had his moments. The Bears game is one in particular. I remember him playing decently well, but overall, I think that's still a position that needs to be addressed, and I wouldn't feel comfortable going into year 3 with him there. Obviously, they believe in him. Crazy athletic corner as well, with the hopes that he could develop into something with more reps. But I would agree that taking a look could never really hurt because Bryce Hall, decent addition, and then you had this battle for corner with a lot of different players in that. So sorry, battle for slot, which could be a lot of fun there because there's like 3 different players who might be able to take that. But I would give it a look, but I don't think they will give it a look.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And like, you know, I don't know. Like, are they at the point right now where they want to kick more money down the line or something? Like, I don't think, I think they're very excited about kind of clearing that cap space out to reset. Like, Mike Greenberg probably wouldn't allow it. He'd probably veto that idea. But they are banking on unproven players at a few key positions, and outside corner is one of them, and that's a pretty dang important position. So, I mean, all eyes in Ray J are going to be zeroed in on that cornerback position. And like also the injuries of Jamel Dean and Carlton Davis have been really like those two didn't play together at the same time until like week 6 or something like
ever.
That. Yeah, ever.
It was brutal. So and Dean's injuries is something you got to think about too. I mean, we know Carlton Davis was injury prone. I don't think he still has ever played a full season of football in the NFL. And that was a big reason for shipping him off. And I didn't hate that move at all, given that information. Dean had a similar problem last year, and he has in the past. So that's something you got to watch out for, too. And if he goes down again, then where are you at, right? You've got Bryce Hall, who I like. But after that, it gets thin. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, for sure. And like that's the thing, right? Where we're saying like, oh, you're putting a lot on Zion McCollum to expect him to come in and start on the outside. Well, that also puts a lot on Jamel Dean then, because if he goes down, man, that's troublesome. So
it is.
Need to have a big year from both those guys, right? If they're going to compete, because otherwise the defense is coming together pretty nicely. We'll see how KJ Britt looks, but opposite or alongside Levante David, I should say. Okay, now, did you see that Antonio Brown filed for bankruptcy? I don't know if that's something we necessarily need to talk about, but it's kind of like
I'm not surprised.
Not surprising, exactly. Not surprising at all. So who knows? Maybe we'll start hearing
financial
rumors.
Troubles with his team in Albany, and he has a history of not paying people back. So I'm not surprised that this is going down.
Yeah. Well. I think on that note, River, I think we've hit on a number of different topics that are relevant to what's going on right now. The biggest being Tristan Wirfs not on the field quite yet, but as some viewers watching us live chimed in, like, let's hold tight and wait. Lots of guys aren't playing. A little different based on the report for Jeremy Fowler, but generally we definitely, I think, are optimistic something's going to get done. And we're definitely, I think we're going to see Tristan Wirfs on the football field this year, whether it gets done before the season or not. I would not panic, at least at this point. And good to see some good things from Antoine Winfield. We got some boots on the ground observations from OTA, compliments of you, Mr. Wells, so appreciate that. Before we get out of here, folks watching, please make sure you subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Super helpful for us. While you're at it, give us a follow on Twitter, or the X formerly known as Twitter, at River H Wells and at SI_Buccaneers. Over at BucsGameday, we are putting out content all day long, every day of the year. So we should be your number one all-stop shop for Tampa Bay Buccaneers content. Thanks for joining us. Yep. Thanks for joining us, folks. And we'll see you again next Wednesday night. Go Bucs.
Yeah.